Well, welcome to the Cinnabar. Today we've got just a dandy Winchester 1886 rifle in 4570. This one comes to us from a local friend of ours, and it's a beauty. 95% barrel and mag tube blue, and on the bolt here, some nice fading case colors on the receiver. It's got an excellent bore. I'm sure it'll be a great shooting rifle. You look and see the wood is dandy as well. Real nice shape. There's some nice figure tiger stripe here in the buttstock, but it's got one really big problem. At some point in the past, this stock was broken here at the wrist and then repaired. So we had a crack that went right across here like this, and that's one of the problems with these stocks that have the tangs inlet in like this. It causes a weak area here. And those tangs can just act like a splitting wedge when you get some kind of pressure against the side. And that's what happened with this one. The owner is concerned, and rightfully so, about the safety of this rifle. So we've got these cracks going this way, and it doesn't look like it was reinforced. It was just glued up, and we don't really know what kind of glue was used. So he brought in a pretty nice looking replacement stock for it, but it turns out this one has some problems too. The inlets are, instead of being about 95% like they normally are, this one's a little too wide. It's about 105%. And we could fill that and make it look presentable. But we've also got some wood missing here at this shoulder here. And again, we could patch it, make it look presentable, but it's still just not right. So, you know, you really got to be careful when you get some replacement wood. You make sure you get it from a reputable company. And I don't know where he got that from, but almost assuredly, if you buy something off of eBay, you're probably not going to get something very good. I haven't had good luck there. So anyway, what I think we need to do is try to save this buttstock. I mean, this is a beautiful original buttstock, so we're going to do the best we can to try to save that one. And so we're going to have to go back in and reinforce this one. You know, it's got a little bit of cosmetic stuff we got to do, but basically we really need to make this buttstock safe to shoot. So stick around, we'll take a little closer look at what we got to work with, and then see if we can't reinforce this and make it safe. And then we're going to take it up on the hill and do a little shooting. So this is what we have to work with. You can see this kind of a white line here. That's where the break was. And it looks like they used some kind of a wood glue probably there. And you can see the finish loss around it where they've done a little sanding just to match it up real good. And that's of course, created some finish loss and opened up the grain some. So when we get this thing pinned and reinforced, we're going to have to go back and try to blend that finish in, fill that grain a little. Now if we follow this out this way, it comes down here to a point and then back this way to the lower tang. And if we rotate it up here, then we can follow it across here and right through where the tang screw goes through and onto the other side. So this piece was broke completely off from the rest of the stock. Now if we rotate it around here, we can follow this all the way out and around and back down to the lower stock, or the lower tang. This was kind of a white line too, and I did find some stain that kind of blended that in really well. And so when we get done and try to blend this finish, we're probably not going to disappear that line completely, but it'll be a lot less noticeable. Now what we need to do now is to reinforce this, to pin it or dowel it, and I like to do that from 4 different directions when you've got a break like this one where it's been completely broke apart. And of course we can hide our pins or dowels in the tang, so where this crack goes across here, we can go in from kind of like this angle and go across that crack. We can do the same thing on the lower tang, although it's more of a challenge down here in the lower tang to get down in there to make that repair. And of course from the front, from this direction, we can drill in here, and we see that crack right here. So if we drill in and get through that crack, then we can dowel that, pin that, and reinforce it. But the challenge is going to be on this other side. Now if we're going to go in from this end like we're going to do on the other side, we're going to have to drill all the way from here clear back across this fracture. And that's difficult, to keep that drill bit straight all that way back there. And then the next challenge is to get the epoxy all the way down in there, because we can't really drill another hole to let the air out and let that epoxy in there. So we're going to have to go with some different techniques maybe to get that epoxy down into the bottom of that hole and to be able to get that dowel in there. So let's get started, and we'll show you some kind of tricks that we've developed along the way. Now we're going to drill 3 holes in order to get ready to pin this stock. First one's going to go in here, and you can see we've already drilled a little pilot hole here at this angle across this repair, and then we'll go in one on this side straight back, and that one's going to be fairly short, and then we'll go in this side and we'll switch to a cordless drill with a long bit, because we've got to go all the way back to about here on this particular one. Okay, so let's get started. We're going to use this rotary tool to start with here, and the big thing we got to be careful of is not slipping and dinging up along these edges here, because that'll show up really bad if we do. And you can see we've got a line marked here with a Sharpie where we're going to stop, so we don't mess up and go too far and go right through the other side. We're almost there now. Yeah, right there. Okay, from that angle I think we're pretty good. Okay, we'll go to the next one here, coming in from the front, and we've got another line back here to show where to stop for this one. So we're going to go into about right here. Okay, now we need to switch to our cordless drill for this other one. Now the challenge with this one, with this big long bit, is keeping everything straight and level all the way through, and we're going to take it nice and slow. You see we've got a long way to go. Our mark's clear back here. We're not going to push very much at a time before we clean it out. If we get to building up chips, especially when we get past these flutes, those chips have nowhere to go. And if we try to force it, then we're going to drill a crooked hole, and that could be a catastrophe. Good. And we didn't come out anywhere that we know of, so I think we were successful. Let's see if our rod can go in there. And it does. That's great. If we get a real crooked hole, then it's really hard to get the dowel or whatever rod we're going to use into the hole. Okay, so now we've got the stock turned over, and we're going to do the same thing into this lower tang channel. Okay. Now for most of these repairs we're just going to use a hardwood dowel, so it's just a matter now of inserting the dowel and marking it, leaving a little bit extra there that we'll come back and trim off when we're done. And we'll make 3 of these, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what we're going to do with that extra long repair. So now it's time to mix up our epoxy, and today I'm using a 2-hour epoxy. I don't really like using 5-minute epoxy on repairs like this, especially where there's multiple repairs to make, because it just starts setting up really fast and gets thick really fast. So a 2-hour epoxy works well. They even make a 24-hour epoxy, and the longer the setup time, the stronger the joint. So this 2 hours is a pretty good one for my purposes. Now, I know there's a lot of debate about what's better, epoxy or wood glue, and the knock on wood glue used to be that it would draw moisture and weaken the joint, but the resin technology today is such that really those high-end wood glues are perfectly acceptable, and either epoxy or wood glue is going to make a joint that's stronger than the surrounding wood. So it's really a matter of personal preference, and I just prefer working with the epoxy. So let's get this mixed up and start on our repair. Okay, so typically it doesn't take a lot of epoxy to do one of these repairs, because the vast majority of the hole that we drilled is going to be filled with our dowels or pins that we're going to use. But in this case we're using a really specialty needle and syringe to get deep into those deep holes that we drilled. This particular needle is for getting antibiotics into the udder of a cow. And of course, living on a cattle ranch, we've got a myriad of different syringes and needles. These we got from our vet, but I'm sure you can find them online if you wanted one to get into a deep hole. But the difference with these is, instead of having a hole in the very tip of the needle, it's got a cutout on the side here and another one here. So we're going to have to mix up enough epoxy that we can get above these cutouts so that we can draw that epoxy up into the needle. So let's go ahead and mix it up. And we're going to get a bunch of it in there. This one's getting towards the end of its life, so it's got a couple little air pockets in there that hadn't worked themselves out. And of course that's far more than we're going to need, but we're going to stop there and mix it up. Okay, for this first repair we'll get a little bit on the needle here, or not the needle, but the toothpick, and get it down into our hole. And it doesn't take a whole bunch, like I say. We want to make sure we get some down in the very bottom, work around the edges here, and it'll push some of it back out, of course. Alright, there we are. Now we'll get our dowel here, shove it all the way in there, and after I said that, I didn't get enough in there. I didn't get any pushed back out, so we need to get just a little bit more in there. Hold on to that without getting it all over myself. So you want to see some what we call squeeze out, and where I didn't get that time, it became obvious I didn't quite get enough in there. So we'll make sure we got more than enough this time. Alright, here we go. And there we've got squeeze out all the way around it. So now we'll let that set up, and then we'll take it over to the milling machine. We'll set this in there, and then we can just mill that off of there. And of course, if you don't have a milling machine, you can always cut it off and then file it off or work it off by hand. Okay, so we've got a bunch of this epoxy in this needle now. We've put a little bit in the bottom, and I'm going to work a little more in there just to make sure we've got enough. Again, we're going to be looking for that squeeze out when we get this in here. Okay. Let's see if we got enough in there now. Now what'll happen is we're going to create some pressure in there, and it's going to try to push this dowel back out. So I like to rotate it, work it back and forth a little bit to try to alleviate some of that. See how when I let go it pushes it back. We really don't have a place to drill into it from the side to alleviate that pressure, to let that pressure go away. So we kind of have to work on it a little bit, and then when we get done, we get it all in there, and then we'll set it down and let gravity do this work. So we'll set it on end, tipped up and resting on the dowel. Okay, now we're going to fill this other side back as far as we can get it, and of course this side actually is deeper than this, even this long needle, so we're going to have to get a little creative on how we get that all the way back in there. Okay, so we're going to start filling from the back here, and this stuff is pretty thick, so we're going to give it a little time to work in there. So now in order to get this all the way to the back where we want it, we're going to use a piece of zinc coated all thread, and we're just going to auger it back to the back here. So you can see a black mark here is where the end of the needle is, and here's where the end of this thing will be when we get done. So there's a gap of about this much in the back, so we're going to have to auger that as we go in. We'll just slowly run it in reverse and push that epoxy to the back, and then we'll use this all thread as our pin. Alright, now we can see that we've got epoxy all into the threads here. We've augered it all the way into the bottom, and we just got a little bit of squeeze out, so we've just got the right amount. So we're going to bottom this out again, and we really don't want to cut this off and then have the metal showing. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to pull it out just a little ways, and then we're going to nip that off, and then we're going to put a plug over the top of it, and then we can blend that wood in and put some stain on it so it doesn't show up as being a piece of zinc coated steel sticking out there. So we'll just go ahead and nip the end of this off here with the rotary tool. Kind of makes it stink a little bit, heating it up with the rotary tool there. Okay, now we've got a plug. We're going to shove this whole thing in. We'll put a little epoxy on it, and then we'll have two of them sticking out here a little bit. Now we've let this epoxy cure overnight, and you can see now we've got this pinned across this crack all the way down this side. We've got it pinned across here. We've got it pinned through the upper tang across in this direction, and we've got it pinned in the lower tang in across the crack in this direction. So this stock not only is stronger than it was before we reinforced it, but it's probably a lot stronger than it was when it was brand new. We've really got it reinforced well. Now, one of the things that I thought we were going to have to do on top of these reinforcements is we had a little crack and a really tight one right in here. It started about here and ended right here in this lower tang. So typically what we would do there, if we've got a really tight crack that we can't get epoxy in from the outside, is we would take a drill bit just about a little bit larger than a round toothpick, and we would drill right down through that crack like at this angle where we're going at the same angle as the crack there. Then we get some epoxy in that hole, and then we shove that epoxy in with a toothpick and use it kind of like a piston to create pressure in there and fill that crack with epoxy. And we just leave the toothpick in there, let it dry, and come back and trim the end of that toothpick off. But what happened is we drilled past this crack a little ways, and we actually got into the bottom of this one. So when we were augering that in with our all thread, we actually filled this crack over here too from the bottom, from inside. I'd like to say that was planned, but actually it was just a happy coincidence. And so we fixed that crack as well from the inside out. And so now we've got everything fixed up the way we need to. We need to come back now. We just need to trim the end of these dowels off, and then we'll go over and mill the ends of these that are in the channels here. We'll put a little walnut stain on them, and then we've got a pretty darn good looking stock, and we've just got to come back now and try to blend that finish a little bit where it's been sanded, and we're good to go, and we can go test fire this thing. So now we've got a little walnut stain here, and we'll dab a little bit of stain on these wooden dowels here just to cover them up a little bit so they don't stand out quite so much. There we are, and around the edge of this one. And then we've got one more little item we need to work here with that white line that's in here from the resin that they used. And we're going to use a real fine bristle brush here and just kind of go over that and cover that up. And we'll let this dry a little bit, then we'll come back and blend this over. We're going to use some Timberlux, which is a boiled linseed based finish that blends these Winchester stocks really, really well. And now we'll start using some of this Timberlux to blend this finish in a little. And we'll just hand rub it in a little. And in order to start filling this grain a little, I've saved some real fine sanding dust from another stock, and we'll just rub some of that in there and start filling that grain up. I didn't really want to just start off wet sanding this, and we may do a little wet sanding a little bit later, but we'll see how this turns out. But really wanted to start filling that grain right off the bat. You can see that's blending in really well. That Timberlux is great stuff for these Winchester finishes. It'll probably take several coats, but we'll get started now. And I like to rub it fairly vigorously. We want to get it warmed up and get it penetrating into that wood. And the warmer it is with this rubbing action, the better it's going to penetrate. Okay, and we'll kind of wipe that off a little bit. Now, looks pretty darn good. It's gonna be a little shiny while it's still wet here, but as it dries, that's gonna blend in, I think, pretty darn well. Okay, first coat down. So the deal that I made with the owner of this beautiful 1886 was that if I was going to try to save this stock and reinforce it, that I was going to have to be the one to test fire it and make sure that it holds together. Well, what are we waiting for? Now, if there's any question in my mind about the structural integrity of this stock, I'd be test firing it in a lead sled, but this thing is stout as can be. Now, we've got a few jugs out there. We'll put a few rounds through it and just see if she holds together. Uh-oh, she must be shooting a little high. Oh, there we go. Oh, I'd say she's ready to go. Not only is she a beautiful gun, she's a great shooting old girl as well. Well, this turned out to be just a dandy 1886 Winchester, and a great caliber too, and a great looking gun. Heck, I don't want to give it back now. Sorry, John. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I hope maybe you learned something about reinforcing stocks. You know, sometimes they're broke really bad, but they can still be saved and still be structurally sound. In fact, I'm sure this one's stronger than it's ever been. So until next time, happy trails from the Cinnabar.